All right. So, who's coming back tomorrow? Who's coming back tomorrow? Yeah? Excellent. Good. That we're going to strongly suggest that, because tomorrow is going to not only take off from what we've discussed today, but also some new things. And I know Simon's got a few surprises up his sleeve and some things that are going to have you thinking differently. And the next section is critical. The next section, you're going to have a chance to have Simon interview many of the folks who are going to help you execute on those strategies that you're developing. So, are we ready to go? You guys are ready to go? Let's welcome back to the stage Simon Black, ladies and gentlemen.
So we actually strategically scheduled Peter up next simply because that was my code. If you remember, this says non-U.S. offshore banking, I think, and I forgot what in the hell I meant by that until I remembered, oh, that's Peter. Because remember, Peter's bank is specifically for non-U.S. citizens, non-U.S. residents. We figured that'd be the perfect segue into lunch, or right after lunch, because I know the majority of folks in here are U.S. citizens, U.S. residents, so it does apply to a minority. We thought it'd be some folks coming in maybe a little bit late. So what we're going to do this afternoon is we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We got several of these financial options, essentially. So we want to start off by demonstrating the wide range of different financial options. I don't know that, I think probably most of these we've never actually discussed before. I know in particular there's one that absolutely haven't discussed before, and so these are very new options for you guys, and I'm very excited about them because they really do cover a lot of ground. So we're gonna have in Peter's case offshore banking for non-U.S. citizens. We're going to get into private banking, a couple of retail banking options, and just give you guys a full range. And we're going to talk about the safety and security metrics that I always look at with respect to offshore banking. So we want to go ahead and get started. We're going to start off with, ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Peter Schiff. Thank you very much, Peter. Have a seat. What's your good side? You want the left or the right? Okay. Just so you guys know, about a year ago, was it a year ago? Maybe a year and a half ago, when it was last March, I stood Peter up on a date. We were supposed to go scuba diving, and we had a little bit of a word that I hate to use, but I'm just going to say miscommunication. I called his room. He didn't answer. I thought he wasn't there. Turned out he was waiting on his balcony. Didn't hear the phone ring. And so we were supposed to go scuba diving. It never happened. So I promised him that that at some point I would fly him anywhere in the world. We'd go scuba diving together. We'd have a great time. And so that was actually supposed to happen here. And it ended up actually not happening because we called yesterday morning, and apparently there's not enough tanks or perhaps not enough oxygen in Mexico. So it was a no-go, and we couldn't go scuba diving. But we did go jet skiing yesterday, and I did have the pleasure of being able to look at the upper half of Peter's buttocks for about 15, 20 minutes while his shorts rode down. No, it's, well, you know, how many people can say that they've seen the top half of Peter Schiff's buttocks? Right, so it's, there we go, this one. So, what I will say, in all honesty, is that we talked about this, and we are still going to do this. We're going to have the scuba date, finally scuba date. Are there any scuba divers here by any chance? Anybody like to scuba? Okay. So, what I actually want to turn this into is a bit of a charity event where, no, it's true. You guys know I have, anybody not know that I have this entrepreneurship camp? I'm all about the entrepreneurial education of young people. I think the young people get a raw deal in the world, and we like to show them a different way. And so what Peter and I are going to do is we're going to have a charity scuba event and invite some folks and see how that turns out, with the proceeds going to our foundation. But there'll be more to follow on that, and appreciate Peter's continued patience in our pending scuba date. So moving on from that, what I want to talk about is Euro Pacific Bank, which is based in St. Lucia, and this is something that Peter started in. When did you start that?
Well, it's in St. Vincent.
So, sorry.
It's all half, 6 of one, half dozen. Yeah. But you know, the interesting thing is the origin of the bank. You know, I have a U.S. firm, Euro Pacific Capital, and by virtue of just my marketing and reputation, we would have a number of international clients. People would open up accounts with me from, you know, Australia, from Germany, from Japan. And when the regulators were coming in after they passed all the AML laws and all this stuff, they began to heavily scrutinize the foreign clients, and it became a problem. And so in order to satisfy the regulators and not have to make my international clients jump through a million hoops, which they didn't like doing, I decided, well, let me just set up an offshore business so I can have people who want to do business with me send the money to my offshore entity, and we won't have to deal with the SEC and FINRA, and I won't have all these crazy requirements. And so I ended up opening up Europe Pacific Bank. But to show you how much worse the regulations have gotten, even since that was 2 or 3 years ago, I had decided that I wouldn't take any more international clients. I would just refer them down to the bank where they can have, the same products, actually more products at a lower cost.
You're saying you didn't want to take international clients at Europe?
Yeah, I decided, because it was such a problem from the regulator's point of view. But they let me do it. They just heavily scrutinized it. But I did grandfather in my existing customers. If they didn't want to move to my offshore entity, they can continue to work with me at Europe Pacific Capital. Well, we've recently had to order those accounts closed because now, based on the escalation of the regulations, we are no longer allowed legally to do business with anybody who lives outside the United States, even if they're American citizens. So I've had clients that have moved from the United States to another country, and I have to ask them to close their account. And so if you're an American citizen and you happen to live abroad, I can't work with you anywhere. I can't work with you at my U.S. firm, and I can't work with you at my offshore bank. But if you're fortunate enough not to be a U.S. citizen, then you can be a customer of my bank. But if you're an American and you still live in America, I can still work with you through my brokerage firm.
Okay, so St. Vincent. Out of curiosity, why did you pick St. Vincent to structure the offshore bank?
Well, there are a number of things you have to look for in a jurisdiction, and they had very good laws as far as privacy, taxes. There's no income taxes for me running the bank. There's no taxes on my customers on their interest or their capital gains. And there is complete privacy of customers' accounts. There are strict laws that protect that. And then you look into some of the other things. There weren't that many banks down there in St. Vincent's, and it didn't really have a reputation for, maybe drugs or anything like that. It wasn't really I didn't think on people's radar as a place to look out for, and nothing bad was happening down there. And it wasn't, the requirements weren't that bad as far as who the regulators were. I wanted to be outside of this Caribbean banking regulatory regime, so they're self-regulated by St. Vincent's. So I thought it would be, a good location to set up.
Have you been down there?
I have been down there.
Yeah, it's a nice place. Yeah, St.
Yeah,
Vincent,
well, the Grenadines, there's some beautiful islands down there. We have an office down there. We now have, I think, 35 to 40 people that work for the bank. Most of them don't work in St. Vincent's, but my bank has been growing. I rented a building, and first I had the bottom floor, and now I had to take the entire building in order to keep pace with the growth.
So one of the things that you do in your bank, by policy essentially, is you said you don't actually make loans.
Right. That's one of the things that I think worries people in the banking world is, what's the bank doing with your money? And, what happens if the bank makes a bunch of loans or invests in a bunch of securities that go bad? What happens with your money? Now, normally, you give a bank money and they pay you interest. And so then they have to take your money and they have to do something with it to pay you the interest. So they have to take some kind of risk. But your reward is your interest rate. Well, today, put your money in the bank, you're going to get nothing. Most currencies are zero interest rate. Yet you're still taking all the risks that they do something stupid with your money, right, and they lose it. And so what I want to do is,
or in certain cases now in Europe where people are paying the bank.
You have negative interest rates in some currencies, and so what I want to do in my bank is alleviate that risk, and also the idea of deposit insurance. Some banks have this, but there's not enough money there, and you have the concept of a bail-in. And I wanted to have a jurisdiction or a bank where people can be secure in the knowledge that their deposit is safe. So what happens at my bank is I don't loan out any of the money. So we don't have a mortgage portfolio. I don't buy junk bonds or Greek government bonds or whatever it is. You open up an account with my bank and the money is there. Now, you might say, okay, well, how do I earn a return? Well, if you want to earn a return, then you have to invest your money your way, which I can help you buy a foreign bond, a foreign stock, whatever it is that you want to buy to generate a dividend or a yield. You can do that to generate income, but the risk that you assume is your risk. It doesn't jeopardize another depositor who might not want to take that risk. You can just leave the money in cash and transact. You're not going to earn any interest, but you don't earn any interest anywhere else anyway. But you know that the money is there, and you have access to it through, through your debit card or through wires. And we have also brought the fees down. I found that in international banking, the Forex costs can be very, very outrageous, and what it costs you to go from one currency to another currency. And we keep the rates relatively low. The overall transaction costs are low. And one thing I did too,
in terms of your markup on the foreign exchange.
Yeah, I mean, it's generally, 1% is about as high as we charge, and it goes down depending on the size of the transaction. But typically banks are charging 2%, 3%, 4%. I mean, really outrageous costs just to convert, a euro into a pound. And we do that a lot for a lot less money. But I introduced the concept of the gold and silver backed debit card to the bank, where if people don't want to keep their money in pounds or euros or dollars, they can keep their money in gold or silver at my bank, and they can spend it by using a debit card, which is a MasterCard, which is linked to that account, and you can spend it and buy stuff with but you know that when you're not spending your money, it's in gold instead of in paper.
Where is the gold in that case?
Most of the gold right now is in the Perth Mint in Australia.
Okay, got it. Okay. And you are, just to be clear, you don't take, you can't open up an account for somebody who is a U.S. citizen, right?
Yeah, and the reason, it's not that there's a law that prohibits me from doing that, but if I were to accept U.S. citizens at my bank, I might not be able to afford to keep the bank because my compliance costs would go through the roof in all the things that I would then be required to do that I'm not now doing because the U.S. government puts a lot of strict regulations about having American customers. And I'm also afraid personally that the U.S. government could retaliate against me somehow by saying I'm helping Americans launder money or moving money offshore because I have too many onshore assets. I don't want to, wave a red flag at a bull. So I want to be able to tell the U.S. government that I'm not accepting any American citizens down there, so they don't have to worry about it. So if you are a U.S. citizen, then you can't have an account, or if you're foreign and you're living in the United States, you can't have an account. So you have to be outside the United States. But I pass on all those savings to my non-American customers because I don't have to deal with those regulations. Then I can have lower costs. But there are still some things I have to do. Like even if you're German and you buy a U.S. stock, you buy IBM and you get a dividend, I've got to tell the U.S. government who you are and how much money you earned. No other country makes you do that. But if you own a U.S. stock anywhere in the world, the U.S. government wants to know who you are and how much you earned. And I have to tell them.
Yeah, we have to call it what it is. I mean, we can say it's regulation and so forth, but what it really is a soft form of capital controls. Capital controls are intended to discourage people from doing these sorts of things, to keep their money trapped in a system. And so they're hitting it from both sides. They're increasing the level of compliance and regulation on the customer, but they're also increasing the level of compliance and regulation on the banks to make banks run away from dealing with people in the U.S.
Yeah, and when I started the bank, it's only 2 or 3 years old. About 70% of our transactions were in U.S. dollars, even though none of our customers were in U.S. dollars. Now, it's down to about 30% of our transactions are in U.S. dollars. So nothing has changed, the same customers, but it's becoming harder and harder to use the dollar. And since I'm a small bank, in order for me to deal in dollars, I have to have a corresponding relationship with a larger bank that is authorized by the Fed to deal in dollars. And those relationships are so hard to get now because they keep dropping me. I keep having to find, now I got a Russian bank, but I keep going from bank to bank because the banks are afraid to have a correspondent relationship with a small bank in the Caribbean because they're worried about how it looks to the regulators, because the U.S. government ultimately controls all of this. So even though I don't have any American customers, by dealing in U.S. dollars, the banks that I have to rely on end up, saying, well, I can't deal with you. Right. And that's why so many little banks are going out of business. They can't even survive because the regulations is making it so difficult.
This is a huge point, is that we've talked about this before. I mean, when a a guy in Bangladesh does business with somebody in Brazil, more often than not, that transaction is cleared in US dollars, and it clears through the US banking system. And that requires that a bank in Bangladesh and a bank in Brazil have corresponding accounts with one of the big banks in the United States. And now what's happening is these big banks in the United States are not only not opening new corresponding bank accounts, but in many cases they're actually closing some of their existing ones. How are you supposed to continue being the dominant financial center in the world and expect that the rest of the world is going to continue to use your currency as the dominant reserve currency for trade and global finance if you're literally rejecting people and not letting them use the system that they have to use in order to engage in global trade? They're practically begging the world to find an alternative, and that's exactly what's happening, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. People are starting to figure out what's on the other side of that door. And it's a huge consequence. This is essentially one of the only remaining advantages of the United States, the U.S. government, the U.S. financial system, is the fact that everybody has to use the U.S. banking system. And they're just kicking people out of it as fast as they possibly can. It's insane.
Yeah,
it's the exact opposite of what they should be doing. But
and it's all coming from these anti-money laundering rules and the enormous penalties. You see some of the U.S. government exacting these huge multi-billion-dollar penalties on banks because what they do is they make each bank responsible for any activity that happens down the line. So that means a bank that deals with me is responsible for what happens at my bank by virtue of the fact that they cleared a wire. So now they have to know everything that's going on. And so sometimes they'll say, you know what, it's not worth it. What they charge me for the services is not worth the risk that they take and the extra compliance costs. Even in the U.S., my gold company, Shift Gold, we had I forget which bank it was, if it was Bank of America or Wells Fargo, whichever one it was, but we used a bank for our gold company. And we got a letter from our bank that said, you have to close your account. We can no longer have accounts for people that sell precious metals.
Yep.
And because it was considered a high risk for money laundering, just because people were buying gold. So we had to close the bank account. But I could see at one point, what if no banks will deal with merchants that sell gold and silver? That you can't even open a bank account. How can you sell gold? Because you can't take cash, then they really get you. So if you're shut out of the banking system, how are you going to have any commerce? But the government doesn't pass a law making it illegal to sell gold. They just make it so no banks will do business with anybody who's selling gold because they crank up the regulatory pressure on those banks. And let's say the bank, I don't know what the bank was making on our account. Let's say maybe they made $10,000 a year on our wires or whatever it was. They might say, well, it costs us $30,000 a year to have this relationship because of all the extra scrutiny, so we're just going to ask you to leave. Yeah. So this is happening all over the banking system.
Okay, Peter, we're about to run out of time. If there are some, and there's plenty of non-U.S. folks in the crowd who might be interested, what are the account minimums and how does one get started?
Well, anybody can open up an account if you're not in the U.S. Europacbank.com is the website, EUROPAC bank.com. And just to give you an idea, Euro Pacific Capital has been in business for 17, 18 years. I have more traffic on Europac Bank than on my main website. It's my most heavily trafficked website, and I don't even advertise it. So there's a lot of word of mouth out there in the international banking community about this bank, and we get a lot of business. So you just go to europacbank.com and you can open up an account online. If you have any questions, there's a little box that pops up and a banker. And one of the things we have is each account has a private banker, and our bankers are highly educated guys, English speaking, or if you speak a different language, we have several different languages, but they're not natives of St. Vincent. They're guys living all around the world that were followers of mine who wanted to work with the bank, but they're people that help you, but they're very fluent in economics and in finance and in English. So it's a very good experience. It's all the back office that's taking place, down there in St. Vincent, but the guys that you deal with, your personal bankers, none of them live there. But you can fill out the paperwork on the website and get it all done. It's a very simple process. If there's a minimum at all, it's very, very low. A few $100, $500, I'm not really sure. But we have all sorts of trading services that you can do. You can trade Forex, you can trade options, you can trade stocks. Pretty much, most markets around the world you can trade. You can decide if you want to trade discount online, never talk to a human being, deep discounted commissions, just buy and sell, on your own, or you can work with a broker who will charge you a commission, give you advice, work with you just like it would in my U.S. account. We have our own proprietary mutual funds that you can buy, and we do have separately managed accounts where I would manage your money on an annual basis for a fee. The same types of services that we offer to U.S. citizens through my company, Euro Pacific Capital, and my asset management firm, which, by the way, I know you're going to learn about this, which I've recently moved to Puerto Rico. I know we have some people talking about the tax benefits of that, but I moved my asset management company from Newport Beach, California, where I was paying better than 50% marginal tax. It's now in San Juan, where I pay 4% tax.
Good stuff. Okay. Thanks, Peter, very much. We're going to hear more from Peter tomorrow. Have some more time to do your usual thing.
And I will try to set up in one of these little
yeah, for sure. So Peter will be around. You'll be able to talk to folks about it more.
Yeah, because if you're an American and you can't work with my bank, you can still work with my U.S. firm about acquiring foreign assets. So if you can't get your assets out of the country, at least invest out of the country and have your U.S. brokerage account full of foreign equities, foreign stocks, foreign bonds, so that you protect yourself at least from a currency crisis in the U.S.
Okay, thanks very much, Peter. Appreciate it. All right, buddy.